These people are the lucky ones. It's 9:30 in the morning on the Italian island of Lampedusa, about 80 miles from the coast of Tunisia in North Africa. Sometime in the last few weeks, these migrants made the dangerous crossing to Europe in a small boat and were picked up by the Italian authorities. They're mostly young men, a few women and children. Many of them are clearly exhausted after their journey, but all seem to be happy to be here. After some initial checks on Lampedusa, this ferry is now taking them further into Europe, where decisions will be made about whether they can stay.
Where are you from? Syria? 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 Syria. Right. Have a nice trip. Syria? Bangladesh? Bangladesh? Bangladesh. Syria. Syria boys. It is extraordinary just to be standing here to watch hundreds of people desperately hoping for a new life in Europe. So many different stories coming from so many different countries. One thing unites them is hope. Hope for better times, better chances, jobs in another place called Europe. The thing is, there are huge amounts of people in Europe, particularly on the far right, who simply do not want this. They do not want them on this continent. And their arrival, the far right would say, poses an enormous threat to our way of life.
Thousands of migrants allowed to enter without permission, who end up crowding out the slums of our towns and cities, undercutting the salaries of our own workers, and in many instances engaging in crime. Will we surrender in front of this? No, we won't.
That's a message that helped propel Giorgia Meloni into power in Italy in 2022 at the head of its most radical right-wing government in 80 years, and topped the poll there in the recent European Union Parliament elections. It was the kind of message that helped Germany's far-right AfD also make significant gains in that European election. And the same in France, where National Rally beat every other French party in that vote. A result that spurred President Macron to call a national election, gambling that French voters wouldn't want the far right actually running their country for the first time since the Second World War.
Merci infiniment à toutes celles et ceux qui partout dans le pays n'écoutant aucun des pronostics.
They didn't.
Front populaire! Front populaire!
It was left-wingers from the hastily assembled Popular Front Alliance who celebrated pushing National Rally into third place. We'll return to that French election and National Rally's ambitions later. But why is the far right on the rise? We're on a journey across Europe to find out, starting at its southern border. It's a regular sight in Lampedusa, migrants picked up by the Italian Coast Guard somewhere between here and the Libyan or Tunisian coast, brought into the island's tiny harbour. It's their first contact with European soil, and it triggers a well-practiced operation.
Well, these migrants we're seeing now have been picked up from out at sea. We don't know the circumstances in which they were rescued, but presumably they were in a small boat. They've been picked up by the Italians and taken here, and as they get off each vessel, You hear the numbers being counted, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so they know how many passengers are getting off. Of course, you don't hear any names. From here, they're being taken into buses, and from the buses, they're driven up to the processing centre on Lampedusa. Here, there are people from the Red Cross, there's an ambulance, there are doctors and nurses, of course the police are here, but also a nun welcoming them to the island.
We followed the buses on the 5-minute drive to what's known as the hotspot.
Well, this is the end of at least this journey. This is the processing centre where those migrants came in on the boat and they're taken by bus. We're not allowed to go any further, but in here they'll have more medical checks, they'll have paperwork, at least the start of the paperwork trail, and they will hope that they haven't moved from one nightmare in the countries they've left into another, certainly a bureaucratic one.
Many people who try to reach Europe have to be plucked from the sea when their boat capsizes or sinks. The Italian Coast Guard says this incident is one of 3 which claimed the lives of 20 people in 24 hours in April 2023. In total, more than 3,000 people died crossing the Mediterranean that year, many hundreds more so far in 2024. We found this boat washed up on the rocks on Lampedusa. Most migrants make the crossing in terrible conditions on dangerous seas in overcrowded wooden or inflatable boats.
If just one of the tube of the rubber boat starts leaking, then it deflates, and then you find yourself in the water basically because the rubber boat deflates and you're there. And the other risk is the bottom of the rubber boat breaking up and all the people finishing into the water.
The lucky ones are picked up by the authorities or search and rescue charities.
Luca, what do you think is the story with the boat? What happened here? Do we know?
Yeah, basically this boat was assisted 2 days ago by one of our patrol boats, the Aurora, which is one of the boats of Sea-Watch, which is the organization that does search and rescue at sea. This boat was spotted by one of our aircraft, Seaboard, 2 days ago. It had around 30 people on board.
There were 30 people on board this boat?
Yeah, exactly. So you can imagine 30 people on this small boat. It's clearly a distress case. So that's why when we spotted the boat, we immediately alerted the authorities because it's a distress case at sea and needs to be rescued as soon as possible. Then in the area, there was also our ship, Aurora, which was there to assist eventually boats in distress that were there. So we also contacted Aurora that arrived on scene. We distributed life jackets to the people that were on board because you have to imagine that people on that boat didn't have life jacket, they didn't have food, they didn't have water. So as soon as we arrived on scene, we distributed these to the people on board, and then we waited with them until the Italian Coast Guard arrived and rescued the people and brought them here to Lampedusa to disembark.
The migrant boats are nearly all the same flimsy design manufactured in bulk for the people smugglers in North Africa. We don't know the fate of the people in this one in a scrapyard on Lampedusa. The fate of many who perish on the crossing is also unknown, their bodies never recovered. But in the island's cemetery, we found a few who'd been given a final resting place.
This is the grave of someone called Esther Ada, and she was born in Nigeria, and she was 18 years old. There's no name on this grave, but it says the remains of a 20-year-old man lie here, and he was amongst a ship of 53 migrants, and it's thought that he came from sub-Saharan Africa. This is the grave of someone called Ezekiel, who was born in Nigeria, who died trying to get to Europe, 36 years old. The Coast Guard rescued this ship just off the coast of Libya, and there were 271 passengers on board. 36 of them were women and 21 children. 25 of those passengers died of asphyxiation below deck, and 6 of them are buried here.
For thousands of people who do make it, this is the gateway to Europe. They're drawn here by the prospect of work, filling big gaps in the continent's labour markets. They're just a small fraction compared to the millions who arrive every year by authorised routes with visas. But it's images like these that far-right parties have seized on across the continent to claim European Christian civilization is being swamped.
E buonasera, buonasera a tutti e a tutte. Il tempo sembra fermarsi, ma adesso vado dalla mia regina a raccontare tutto quello che i miei occhi hanno visto e le mie orecchie hanno udito.
But there are people in Lampedusa who reject how the far right frames the migration issue as a threat to European Christian culture.
Ma non è così, perché fra i migranti ci sono anche molti cristiani, cristiani copti, cristiani... Non è così. Ci sono musulmani, ci sono cristiani, ma credo non sia quello il problema. Il problema è, dovremmo chiederci perché le persone lasciano il proprio paese, quali sono le cause che spingono centinaia di migliaia di persone a lasciare il proprio paese e perché non possono viaggiare in maniera regolare, pagando un biglietto e andando dove vogliono.
But those more welcoming voices are not making policy. NGOs, charities and other critics say deals the EU has done with North African countries mean it's outsourced its migration policy, effectively paying them to stop people reaching Europe. The result, they say, scenes like these.
You are endangering the people.
Sea-Watch accuses the Libyan Coast Guard of firing towards migrants in boats.
They're shooting again. So-called Libyan Coast Guard, stop shooting in the water. So-called Libyan Coast Guard, what you do is very dangerous. Over.
Forcing people out and setting fire to their vessel in another instance. Life-saving is everyone's responsibility, according to the European Commission. But its migration commissioner accuses the Libyan Coast Guard of being infiltrated by criminals. Sea-Watch says this shows the Libyan Coast Guard using a boat supplied by Italy and identical to its own Coast Guard vessels to interfere with a rescue operation by the charity Doctors Without Borders.
What are they doing?
Previous Italian governments have made things harder for NGOs. But Sea-Watch says the current one is turning the screws.
So what they are trying to do is to slow down the operation of NGOs, also, for example, by assigning place of safety to disembark the people that were rescued at sea farther northern of Italy, so up to Genova, to Ravenna. That means that once the vessel NGO is rescuing a boat at sea, then they have to navigate for 4 days to arrive at the port where they can disembark, while usually in the past it was, and according to international law, the port that is being assigned has to be the closest fast one, and usually it was the ports in Sicily that were possible to reach in like one day. So what they are trying to do is to slow down NGOs' work, to keep them away from the area of operation.
Libyan Coast Guard, Libyan Coast Guard, we are observing your reckless operation. We are observing your reckless operation. There's a close rescue asset, Humanity 1, which was already in the rescue of those people. You are interfering in this rescue. Now there are people in the water. There are many people in the water because of your reckless operation. Please head back from the scene. Please head back from the scene. Over.
This sculpture symbolizes Lampedusa's role as the door to Europe. To explain why the far right is so determined to slam the real door shut and why that's delivering them electoral success, we need to head north, further into the heart of Europe. All roads, it used to be said, lead to Rome. Italy's capital draws millions of tourists every year, fascinated by the ancient remains of the Roman Empire, dating back over 2,000 years. Rome was also the center of attention in 2022, when Giorgia Meloni became Prime Minister at the head of a coalition between her right-wing Brothers of Italy party and the even more radical Salvini League. Still in power, it's Italy's most right-wing government since the end of the Second World War, nearly 80 years ago.
Benito Mussolini, loudly threatening war unless France handed over to Italy whole chunks of her rich North African empire.
You can still feel the presence of the man who took Italy into that war, the fascist dictator Benito Mussolini. This is the balcony where he addressed the crowds in the center of Rome. Some feared Meloni's election meant Italy was reviving that extreme right-wing past because of the neo-fascist roots of her own party. She was at pains to reject that shortly before she became Prime Minister.
The Italian right has handed fascism over history for decades now, unambiguously condemning the suppression of democracy and the ignominious anti-Jewish laws.
We'll look at whether fascism is just history, why the migration issue is boosting support for the far right across Europe, how far-right parties are making promises on immigration they probably can't deliver, and what the rise of nationalist populist parties means for the future of the EU. Within a year of being elected on a promise to cut immigration, Giorgia Meloni visited Lampedusa with the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and promised to take tougher measures.
Noi porteremo la norma per estendere al massimo consentito dalle regole europee il trattenimento ai fini del rimpatrio di chi arriva irregolarmente in Italia, e daremo mandato al Ministero della Difesa di attivarsi immediatamente per realizzare le strutture che sono necessarie.
It's the kind of tough message that has won her party's support, even in regions a long way from where the boats land. This is L'Aquila, the capital city of the Abruzzo. This beautiful region across the mountains east of Rome is where Giorgia Meloni's party got some of its earliest electoral successes before taking power nationally and boosting the confidence of the far right across Europe.
Grazie.
It's also an area with a tragic history of natural disaster.
Think of Italy, and maybe somewhere like this comes to mind. A sun-kissed piazza enjoying a coffee, but they're also rebuilding here after the devastating earthquake back in 2009, which claimed the lives of over 300 people. As you can probably hear, they're flat out trying to reconstruct the center. But this is also perhaps the epicenter of a political earthquake that's rumbling here and far, far beyond.
The mayor of this city, from the Brothers of Italy party, says its role in starting that political earthquake is down to paying attention to local issues. But the question of immigration is never far away.
L'Aquila è stato il primo capoluogo di regione in cui un esponente di Fratelli d'Italia è diventato sindaco, così come l'Abruzzo è stata la prima regione in cui un esponente di Fratelli d'Italia è diventato governatore. Io credo che il successo della nostra proposta elettorale qui in città dipenda dalla percezione che l'amministrazione attuale è immersa nei problemi della città. E i problemi della città, sul tema delle migrazioni per esempio, sono duplici, nel senso che noi siamo attenti alle esigenze naturalmente dei cittadini che non sono italiani, esattamente come siamo attenti alle esigenze dei cittadini italiani, così come non nascondiamo che l'immigrazione incontrollata crea delle tensioni ed è accaduto anche in questa città con i minori non accompagnati che si sono resi responsabili di reati legati soprattutto allo spaccio e a reati contro la persona e anche diciamo da comportamenti che hanno minato un po' la convivenza pacifica con delle forme di inciviltà.
But perhaps it's not surprising that a regional area like the Abruzzo has shifted so radically to the right. It may reflect not just a European, but a global trend. The political historian Giovanni Orsina puts it like this.
People think they've been betrayed and they are angry about this. And if you look at how the voters are behaving across the Western world, you see that there is now a very deep divide between the big cities, above all the center areas of the big cities, and the rural areas. People who live in small centers, in rural areas, that feel cut off the global world, and people who live in the big cities that are like the knots of the global network, the crossing points of the global networks. You see this essentially everywhere. So it is quite clear that this backlash, this political anger, is related to the fact that you think that your local communitarian way of life is threatened by globalization, or the other option, you feel that globalization is good for you because you live in one of the elements of the global network. And it is quite clear that this is the division now, and it is quite clear that the local elites of the periphery are angry at the global elites of the centers.
That anger has many sources. The cost of living crisis, climate policy, even issues like gender. But the arrival of thousands of migrants is near the top of the list. However, L'Aquila also provides other insights, how migrants can often make great success stories, and of the economic pressures driving the very immigration which is provoking the backlash.
Hey, Jamie.
Pedro.
Benvenuto.
Thank you for having me. Good to see you. Thanks for your time.
Prego, prego.
Looking forward to your restaurant.
Grazie.
Looking forward to the food even more.
Prego.
Thank you.
Pedro came from Albania in the 1990s, living in an abandoned bus while learning to be a chef.
And what's going in here? This is the calamari.
Calamari, sì.
And is this a traditional Albanian dish or a traditional Italian dish?
No, è un piatto italiano.
Italian dish, a Pedro Italian dish. Oh, it looks good. This is asparagus.
Sì, asparagi.
Okay.
Sì. Perché la prima volta arrivato in Italia, a me dopo un anno, come persona indesiderato, mi hanno spedito in Albania un'altra volta. Però poi ho insistito. ho insistito e sono ritornato. Per i primi anni che ho vissuto in Italia, all'Aquila, io ero clandestino.
Can't wait to taste this. It looks amazing.
Now he owns a restaurant that can serve 270 diners at a time and employs 12 staff. As Italy's population gets older and the workforce shrinks, he's open about the need for more migrant labour from outside Europe.
Buono,
Excellent.
Oggi siamo arrivati a un punto dove la manodopera non si trova più. Anche i lavori difficili che si facevano una volta, che venivano dalla parte dell'est dell'Europa, tipo l'Albania, la Macedonia del Nord, il Kosovo, la Romania, la Moldavia. Oggi, non so se devo dire purtroppo o per fortuna, dobbiamo aprire le porte all'immigrazione asiatica, all'Africa. È diventato importante, però dobbiamo aprire le porte in modo corretto, non con i sbarchi, non con tutti i barconi che affondano e tutto quanto. Bisogna mettere delle regole ben precise, però l'immigrazione c'è stato, ci sta e ci sarà per sempre, nessuno lo può fermare.
Like many developed countries, Italy's birth rate has been declining for decades and is well below the level needed to stop the population falling. Far-right parties across Europe say increasing births, not immigration, must be the answer. But that would take decades. Giorgia Meloni says Italy cannot sustain the current level of illegal migration. But since she took power, Italy has actually accepted more migrants, in part because of the pressure from businesses like Pedro's.
According to data from the UN Agency for Refugees, in 2023, just last year, there were about 114,000 migrants arriving into Italy by sea. That was up from 105,000 the previous year, which in turn was twice the amount of refugees that had come in 2021. The irony about Meloni specifically is that, at least in a few instances, she has taken measures that go squarely against her and her party's traditionally anti-migrant stance. There is, for instance, this measure that offers temporary permits to seasonal migrant workers. It used to be at around 80,000 back in 2022, but there were thrice as many entrepreneurs looking to hire those seasonal migrant workers, and only 1 in 3 got those permits. She comes into office, the following year she almost doubled the amount of those migrant permits, which are now standing at about 150,000 per year over the 2023 to 2025 period. The bottom line is that there's a clear demand for migrant labor there, and there are clear economic advantages to it.
So Giorgia Meloni has bowed to economic reality and in practice has behaved like a mainstream politician. Yet she still seems really popular, despite failing to cut immigration. So why aren't the voters more angry?
Meloni couldn't really stop the migrant waves. And she said so herself. She said, I thought I could do more, but I couldn't do more. So she recognized that her migration policy essentially failed because she thought she could stop the migrants or at least manage the migration fluxes more. So one could say, look, Meloni promised she would stop the migrants. She failed. The voters should be angry. As a matter of fact, the voters are not angry because they recognize that she tried and that she at least puts herself in harmony with the worries of her electorate. And that for the voters is enough, at least vis-à-vis other parties that didn't even recognize those worries.
Perhaps that's why Brothers of Italy activists put a subtly different spin on the issue as they prepared for a regional election in the Abruzzo's biggest city, Pescara.
Non è vero che noi vogliamo limitare l'immigrazione, vogliamo semplicemente che sia controllata. L'Italia è sicuramente forse uno dei paesi più accoglienti che c'è in Europa, ma azzarderei a dire anche nel mondo, quindi non è un problema di accettare o meno le persone che arrivino in Italia. Quello che dobbiamo controllare è chi arriva, perché e soprattutto offrire a loro una vita che non è sicuramente quella che hanno offerto prima di Giorgia Meloni alla gente che arrivava in Italia. Dobbiamo dare il rispetto della persona e questo si può fare solo se l'immigrazione è controllata e così da riuscire a gestirla in Italia e anche fuori.
When a group of people at a far-right commemoration in Rome were filmed in January 2024 giving the salute used by Mussolini's fascists, it caused uproar across Europe. Meloni was challenged to condemn it, not least because her Brothers of Italy party has its roots in what was originally a neo-fascist organisation. Its flame logo reflects that. We could find no record she issued the condemnation her critics demanded, although she has censured a similar incident in her party's youth wing. There was more controversy in May when the Italian army's calendar celebrated soldiers who had fought for Mussolini's regime as well as against German occupiers after 1943. The Defense Ministry denied trying to rehabilitate fascism. The ambiguous attitude of Meloni's party prompted this question.
Are you fascists?
Assolutamente no. Noi di Fratelli d'Italia assolutamente rigettiamo ogni forma di totalitarismo. Il fascismo è una di queste, quindi assolutamente noi siamo al di fuori da quella linea. Essere di destra non vuol dire essere fascisti, sono due cose nettamente diverse, quindi Fratelli d'Italia è un partito di destra semplicemente.
Are you fascists?
No. Assolutamente no.
Meloni's party, Brothers of Italy, is most certainly a right-wing party. Whether it is far-right, I think, above all now, after 18 months of government, I think that can be discussed. Because bottom line, this party is playing the Atlanticist game, is playing the European game, it's respecting entirely the Italian constitution. Nothing has been done about individual rights. So, is this a far-right party? I think this is a right-wing party.
Meloni has been called a chameleon, presenting different faces internationally and domestically. But while she may not at the moment be driving Italy back to the fascist past, many Italians from a migrant background fear the impact of her party's anti-immigration rhetoric. Steve Emejuru was a refugee from the Biafran War in Nigeria over 40 years ago, and despite some horrific experiences, tries to build bridges between cultures. What kind of racism have you had to deal with?
Some time ago, I was beaten up by 4 people that I should go back to my country, that this is not my country. I had to be rushed to the hospital. I lived this on my own body. It's one of the reasons why I insisted in interculture, because when the people know about your life, your tradition, your culture, maybe it will bring down the rate of discrimination and racism. So I know Italy is a very good country. I love Italy. I'm an Italian.
Despite that optimism and willingness to connect, he has a rather cynical view of the motives of radical right politicians.
As a continent, Africa is being used for campaign, putting fears into the Italian citizens that Africans who have come here to substitute the Italian community. So they have been getting their votes, talking against Africa, talking against blacks, discriminating against blacks. So they are using the discrimination racism, to end votes. For European election, it will be the worst.
A message echoed by a high-profile Italian journalist with a Moroccan family background, who says she's getting more abuse online and the government has emboldened racists.
Il razzismo in Italia è un'onda che è cresciuta nel tempo con il ingrandire dei partiti di destra, di estrema destra, non solo di Giorgia Meloni, ma anche della Lega di Matteo Salvini. E ovviamente più questi partiti sono cresciuti nel tempo e più questa onda di razzismo è cresciuta. E anche oggi che Giorgia Meloni è al governo non è cambiato niente, anzi quei razzisti che qualche anno fa, magari anche in maniera meno audace, si permettevano di esternare alcune frasi razziste, oggi sono molto più orgogliosi di farlo e non hanno più paura.
But Brothers of Italy activists insist they aren't racists.
Is your party just about migration?
Assolutamente no. Noi siamo tacciati di questa cosa che è una cosa probabilmente molto vecchia, ma tanto vecchia, non recente. Non siamo assolutamente un partito razzista, assolutamente, è smentito dai fatti quotidiani del nostro vivere quotidiano, del nostro fare politica. Noi vogliamo risolvere il problema dell'immigrazione, ma non escludendo, trovando una soluzione a tutta la tematica, perché noi siamo inclusivi e lo abbiamo dimostrato in tanti modi.
Whatever its record on immigration, it's not hard to find examples of how the government's anti-migration rhetoric conflicts with economic reality.
Hello. Good morning. Hello. Hi.
Vincenzo Saccone, an Italian brought up in England, moved here to set up a kiwi fruit farm just half an hour outside Rome. But Italians are having fewer babies. The population is aging and becoming more urbanized. So, like Pedro, the restaurateur, he struggles to find labor, at least legal labor.
Of course they do.
But the problem is they don't like working in the farms, probably, the Italians. That's the biggest problem.
So what you want is easy immigration?
That's it. The bureaucracia is the one that stops us. And then we have all the, when we are picking, all the Italian government sends the inspectors to, and if they catch you, they close your farm.
You're joking? Really?
No,
Is that serious?
Really, that is serious. It's €6,000 of a fine for every extra community, and then they block you until you pay all the fines. You cannot pick.
So what happens if you can't fix this shortage of staff? What happens to the farm and your business?
Yes, we're in difficulty. We can't pick. If we need, it takes, instead of a week, it will take a month, and then the fruit goes mature. That's the problem. And they don't understand this, but you know, because then you have to get guys who are with no permission or something to come and work. You have to go the other way.
Zishan Ahmed, one of Vincenzo's workers, has all his papers now. But like many after fleeing his home country, Pakistan, he took an expensive, dangerous and unauthorized journey via Iran, Turkey and a boat to reach here 3 years ago.
20-30 giorni arriva a Iran, dopo arriva a Istanbul, tutto paga soldi, arriva a Istanbul, dopo arriva a Italia dentro la barca. 8 giorni sta dentro barca senza mangiare, senza niente. Dopo arriva qua a Italia, barca prende pulizia da mangiare, da tutto cose molto bene, da casa. Mo da casa famiglia, 3 anni sta a casa famiglia, dopo arriva quello senda un giorno di lavorare. Dopo visto qua principale molto bene, parla bene, imparato me tutto cose, lavora così. Mo sta 3 anni sta insieme lui, già fatto tutto cose bene, patente ce l'ha, pure macchina ce l'ha, tutto cose ce l'ha, pure lavora capisci molto bene, kiwi, mo sta molto bene.
As the European elections approached, Centre-left parties knew talking about immigration meant letting the far right set the agenda, even though the economic case for it seemed obvious.
Why aren't politicians simply honest and tell us we all need immigration?
Because the other option is easier. You need to have politicians that look at the long term to have this kind of approach. What is easy instead in the short run to say we're against immigration because these people are coming here, they are eating what you are supposed to eat, they're taking jobs away from you. And so the easy way is to say, for many politicians, that the only solution is just to close borders and that's it. Now, of course, you need to have a regular immigration. That's the point. People that come in irregularly is a problem.
There were protests in April 2024 when the EU Parliament approved new rules making it harder to enter Europe and easier to send back failed asylum seekers, a sign the far right was already exerting an influence on policy, but also a recognition that reducing immigration needs Europe-wide coordination. In recent months, far-right leaders have put on displays of unity like this one in Spain. But can they now work together to change Europe?
There are red lines in Europe, and some of these right-wing parties are on this side of the red line. Others are on the opposite side on the red line, and this makes it very difficult for these parties to work together. Now, what they can do is to create veto blocks, also together with the European People's Party. So there is the possibility for them to work to block things they don't like, for instance, on environmental policies. So there might be in the coming European Parliament a veto right-wing majority comprising the far right, the right, and the center-right. What they cannot do presently is to work together, so to create a positive majority.
L'extrême droite est une force extraordinaire pour dire non. Hein? Non au monde tel qu'il va, non au progrès, non à l'Europe, voilà, non à l'économie globalisée. Très bien, ça, elle sait faire. Mais elle dit oui à quoi? Vers où l'extrême droite veut-elle emmener les peuples européens, sauf à les faire revenir au monde d'avant, c'est-à-dire au monde des années 30, au monde des nations qui étaient repliées sur leurs intérêts nationaux et qui se sont affrontés.
When Italy turned sharp right 2 years ago, there were fears it was returning to its fascist past. Those fears have not been realized so far, but the growth of the far right in a host of other countries is posing similar questions, including Portugal.
This is our country. It's not for people who don't like their lives there. Come here and do whatever they want. No. And if they want to come here, they have to work and they have to respect our culture. It's not you go to Lisbon downtown and you see like, it's Bangladesh, you know? It's not Bangladesh, it's Portugal.
Germany.
Your critics will say you're a bunch of Nazis. You are, aren't you?
Nein, wir sind keine Nazis. Denn wenn Sie sich anschauen, was Nazis gemacht haben, Nazis haben andere Länder überfallen. Wir stehen hingegen für einen friedlichen Ausgleich und für eine Vermittlungsrolle statt für eine Beteiligung an Kriegseinsätzen im Ausland. Ja.
And France.
Does all this debate around immigration make you feel ashamed to be French?
I'm not ashamed to be French, but I'm ashamed of my country. I have to say sometimes when I'm abroad and people ask me, things about my country, I say I didn't vote for them because it's so sad.
It's those countries we visit next time.